As I mentioned last week, my wife and I have been married for over 25 years. We have 3 children. We've been blessed with 3 children. We've also had the privilege of becoming foster parents for the last 4 or 5 years. And I'll tell you that I went into this a little tentatively, but I did it for my wife, and I will tell you it has been a tremendous blessing. We've had several young children come into our care as foster children, and it's been just a real blessing. In fact, we've got one little girl who has been with us for over 3 years, and we're hoping to adopt her. And it's been great. It's been a very positive experience. Obviously, everyone in this room knows, though, that there's some kids who are in the system that have very negative experiences, right? They come from harsh circumstances, including abuse, right? Some verbal abuse, some physical abuse, etc. So, and that's not just foster kids, but other kids, even not in the system, have been through very harsh circumstances. Now, why do I mention this and show you what is a disturbing picture? Well, I'm going to use this as an example later on for why God is the best explanation for morality. And you may wonder, well, how are you going to do that? Well, I'll get to that in maybe about 7 or 8 minutes. But let's take a big step back and start from the beginning with this question here: what is morality? Now, simply put, morality is the standard for right and wrong behavior. The standard for right and wrong behavior. Does morality exist? I think, virtually everybody recognizes morality exists, right? Unless you are a sociopath, we all have this moral compass, so to speak, right? And some people call it a conscience, that guides you in what is right and wrong behavior. So we know what it is. We know that it exists. We're going to look at some examples here, right? This is an example of the right behavior. Daughter is comforting her father who has recently lost his wife. This is an example of a right behavior, a good behavior. This is an example of a wrong behavior. Somebody is physically abusing an elderly person. So this page is not controversial. I think virtually everybody agrees with this, right? Morality exists. There's a right and wrong behavior. And we all have a moral compass. The big question we move to in this topic is this question here: what is the source of morality? This is the key question. Now, one thing that's very important is to understand that we're not asking how we become aware of morality, but rather what is the basis for morality? What determines what is right and wrong behavior? That's a very important piece that we'll come back and touch on. So, what are some options around what might be the source of morality? So some people would say, parents. Our parents are the source of morality. Now, this is a good example where I think this may be how we become aware of morality. They might help teach us, but do parents really determine what is right and wrong? Probably not. Some people would say it's from societies, groups of people, countries determine what is right and wrong. Others may say it comes from DNA. So based on your genetic disposition, this might give you a certain inclination to behave a certain way for survival and for flourishing. So morality is just an aid to survival. Others would say it comes from God, right? A divine being. Here you've got the Christian God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So these are some of the most common options that people would mention as the source of morality. Now you'll notice on the left side, these are subjective, because basically morality is grounded in people. We determine what is right and wrong behavior. versus this one, and we talked about this in week 1, objective versus subjective. This is objective. This means morality is independent of our preference. We don't determine it, right? Now, according to the Bible, God is the source of morality. In fact, there's a great verse here in Romans 2:15. It says, the work of the law, God's law, is written on their hearts. And he's speaking about Gentiles here, right? They didn't have the written law necessarily, but God had written his moral law on their hearts. And that's why, this goes back to that compass we saw a few slides ago. That helps make sense of why we all have this moral compass. Now, not everybody agrees with it, right? Everybody in this room would say this. There's a lot of people who would say this is the source of morality somewhere on this page. So how do we make a case for this? Well, I'm going to give you the logical form, but then we can talk about how you put that in layman's terms. So this is the logical argument for morality. If morality is objective, then God exists. Morality is objective, therefore, God exists. So it's pretty straightforward. The conclusion follows. If premise 1 or statement 1 is true, and premise 2 is true, this follows. You can probably see that pretty easily. The big question is, why should we believe? How do we understand statements 1 and 2, and why should we believe that they are true? And once you understand the concept here, then you can kind of put it in your own language. So, let's start with this first one here. What is this saying? So again, this is saying if morality is objective, in other words, it's not based on human beings. It's independent of human preference, opinion. If it's that, separate from humans, then God is the source. That's what this is saying. So let's unpack this a little bit. If it's not based on human beings, the source still has to be either personal or impersonal. I mean, those are the only two choices, right? It has to be either personal or impersonal. Now we can understand personal probably means a divine being. That's a personal being, right? Impersonal would be some impersonal force, that this moral standard just exists separate from people. That's even hard to understand how that would occur, but that there's a source of moral values that's just impersonal. It's just out there, like laws of logic. But I want you to think about what's going on here with morality. When we're faced with a moral dilemma, a decision to make, you can choose to do what is right or good, or you can choose to do what is wrong or bad, right? But we all have this inclination to follow and do what's good, right? Now we know as Christians that there is a struggle here sometimes with our sinful nature, this propensity to sin, right? But we all know, all humans know, unless you're a sociopath, that we ought to do what is good. We have a duty, we have a responsibility to do what's good. We don't always do it, but that's what we ought to do, right? What makes most sense of that? A personal authority that you're responsible to obey, or some impersonal source, some impersonal force? And I think clearly a personal authority makes more sense. There's a Christian apologist known as Brett Kunkel. He has a ministry called Maven, and he specializes in working with teens on a variety of topics with Christian apologetics. And I mentioned him because I want to give him credit for this. He gave a great illustration, I think, that explains this point. So I want you to imagine that you are at a Chinese restaurant. And I don't know, your favorite food? Mine is lo mein. Love lo mein. So you're all eating your favorite food. And at the end of the meal, they bring you the bill, and they bring you fortune cookies, right? Yeah. So I want you to make believe you're in the restaurant, and you open up your fortune cookie. And the piece of paper says, leave the restaurant immediately. Now you might be like, whoa, like is somebody telling me something? But I want you to pretend that this is not a message from any person. This is a randomly generated message on a piece of paper. Would you follow this random message? No, you'd be like, okay, whatever. Now I want you to imagine, instead of the piece of paper, there is somebody sitting next to you, a family, and a gentleman leans over and says, I want you just to leave the restaurant. Yeah, you're gonna be like, are you going to immediately get up? You're going to be like, no, I'm not going to leave the restaurant. Like, who are you type of thing. So you probably wouldn't listen to them. Now I want you to imagine that the person says, I'm an FBI agent, pulls out a badge, proves it to you, and says, we are about to take down this restaurant in a sting operation. As an authority, I'm telling you to leave the restaurant. Now do you leave the restaurant? Yes. Absolutely, right? And the big difference is there is a personal authority. So try to demonstrate the fact that we have an obligation to follow personal authorities, not impersonal forces, and not just somebody who is our peer, right? So I think God makes the best sense. Also, this authority transcends humankind because he makes it applicable to all human beings. It's not like a few of us just have this inclination or obligation. It's all human beings. So this personal authority must transcend all human beings and to make it applicable to all of them. So that's why this explanation here is why that if morality is objective, separate from people, then God exists, because God is far and away the best explanation. Yes. So let's move on to the next one here, because I think this is the one that gets probably the most resistance, that morality is objective. Now you'll recall things are either subjective, like my favorite ice cream, or they are objective, like, math. We don't determine this answer, we discover this answer. So what this is saying is morality is more like this, that it's independent of our opinion. It is objective in nature. How do you make that point? Well, I'm going to give you 4 ways, and 1 or 2 of them might be a little bit like, oh, I'm not sure I fully get that, but hopefully 1 or more of these ways really resonate with you as to why morality is objective. The first one is, again, I want to make the point here that the answer, the solution, is not based on my opinion. It is separate from my opinion. So one of the ways that Christian apologists argue this is that actions themselves are right or wrong. So it's not based on my feelings, it's not based on what I desire, but just like here where there's an answer here separate from my opinion, so also certain actions are right or wrong. There is a rightness and a wrongness to the action. It's not based on my feelings. So let me give you one example here. This is going back about 10 years. This is in, if you remember this was in Aurora, Colorado. This was that movie theater shooting. It was a Batman movie. And I'm not going to mention the person's name or show his picture, but he entered the movie theater. I think he had put tear gas out there and started randomly shooting. This is what behind the scenes footage looked like. Killed 12 people. Injured another 58 with gunfire. Now what I would submit to you is that this action of randomly shooting at innocent people, there's no justification for this, that action itself is wrong. It's not just the way I feel inside, but the action itself is wrong. And once you recognize that certain actions themselves are right or wrong, independent of our opinion, then that pushes you towards morality being objective. It is separate. Just like 2 plus 2 is 4, the answer 4 is separate from my opinion. It has a right and wrong value itself. So do certain actions. Certain actions are right or wrong. Just like, remember we talked about this car is blue. It has this attribute separate from my opinion. Certain actions are right or wrong. Now that might be, out of the four I'm going to share with you, that might be a little bit of the hardest one to understand. This is one I really like, and explaining why morality is objective, to say that human opinion really doesn't change whether something is right or wrong. Now let's go back to our example here, right? Again, this is a harsh example, and I recognize that, but that's typically where we can make the case the easiest. If a parent said it was acceptable to physically abuse their child, would that make it so? Obviously, I mean, none of us even have to answer. Absolutely not. If a certain society said it was acceptable to abuse children, would that make it so? No. So we're starting to see where, I guess people really don't determine right or wrong. That is something that's outside of our opinion. This is another one you could do, is let's say a certain country decided it was acceptable to abuse elderly people. In fact, if we determined that they were no longer productive and we only have a finite amount of resources, that it was okay to kill them. Would that make it acceptable? Absolutely not. So these are examples where you can demonstrate that humans really don't decide what is right and wrong. This is a great one. For anybody who says that morality is based on society, this is the one I like to bring up, moral progress. Is it possible for societies to improve morally? I think the answer is yes. Think about with slavery in this country. Did this country improve morally when slavery was abolished? Yes, everything else being the same, we improved morally. Well, if societies and countries can improve morally, what are you comparing them against? There must be this standard that transcends all societies, and you either move towards that standard or you move away from that standard. That's the only way it can make sense that you can have moral progress as a society. I think this is a pretty good one because it's easy to help people understand. If they think groups of people decide morality, this is the one I would bring up. You can use another one, Nazi Germany. What is more acceptable morally? Nazi Germany and the way they treated Jews, or Germany as of today? Just on that one, I mean, I don't even have to, have you answer. Obviously, Nazi Germany was far more wrong in what they did. Notice how they justified it, right? They villainized Jews. In order to try and make the behavior acceptable to the people of the country, they villainized Jews. And that's what happens, but a lot of time is, well, why do we get off track? That's because we take a certain situation and we either try to make it right or we try to make it wrong and interpret it a certain way, and then if it's really wrong, it makes it acceptable, right? So like slavery in this country, the way they justified it is that they were less worth than white people, and so they were able to justify slavery. And then Christians had a huge hand in abolishing slavery, saying no, all people have intrinsic value, and so we should not have slavery. Actually, we'll get to that a little bit later. This is the fourth one. I think this is a great one, is guilt, right? If human beings determine morality, why do we all fail at it, and why do we all feel guilty? I mean, I think all of us can recognize that at times we've done some things that are wrong in our lives, right? And we feel this guilt. Doesn't that make more sense that there's an authority that is outside of human beings, and we are falling short of God's standards, and that's why we feel guilt? I think guilt is a great example for this. This also is good for the genetic one. If somebody says morality is based on your genetics, your DNA gives you a predisposition to behave a certain way, well, if that's the case, then why do I fall short, and then why do I feel guilty about it? Again, all of this is to point back to the fact that human beings don't determine morality. All right. Great quote here by C.S. Lewis. He was very famous for this argument around morality. Mere Christianity, some other great books. I love this quote. It seems then we are forced to believe in a real right and wrong. First, human beings all over the earth have this curious idea they ought to behave in a certain way. Second, they do not in fact behave in that way. The truth is we believe in decency so much that we cannot bear to face the fact that we are breaking it, and consequently we're trying to shift responsibility, right? We make excuses. Well, I did this because, and you try and justify your behavior, right? So this kind of plays into that last point around guilt. All right, let me show you a little video. I've got a couple of videos for you. This is Christopher Hitchens. Obviously, his name is here. He has passed away now. Very famous atheist. And this was his challenge from a moral perspective. See how you might answer this.
I have a moral challenge on this point. Answer me this if you think that morality comes from the supernatural and we require celestial dictatorship permission for it. Name me a moral action committed by a believer, or a moral statement or ethical statement uttered by one that could not be made or uttered by an unbeliever. I've asked this in a number of venues and forums now. I'm going to keep on asking it. I've not yet had an answer. If I was to ask anyone in this room, however, could they name a wicked action performed or a vile statement made by someone attributable only to their religious faith, there isn't a single person here who would have to hesitate for
Now, what I would say, I mean, the obvious one, this would trip people up. And I can understand why. When I first heard it, I'm like, wow, interesting. But there's two issues, two ways I would answer it. Number one is, I would say you can't do the greatest commandment Jesus said, right? The greatest commandment is to love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. You can't do the greatest one. So that answers his question. But what I would say is, what you're after, Christopher, is not, okay, you're basically saying an atheist can be just as moral as a Christian or religious person, so I don't really need God. And what I would say is that's not what we're after. What I'm after, Christopher, is what is the source of morality? So it's not about how we become aware of it. It's not about how we follow it. It's about explaining how it exists and who determines what is right and wrong behavior. So he is asking this, and it's kind of skirting the issue that is first and foremost. Let's talk about moral values. So far we've grouped everything under morality, and this is duties or obligations. Another way that morality can be argued is that there are certain moral values. You probably have heard them called vices or virtues. Patience is a virtue, etc. So there are some things that are clearly wrong: greed, lying, unkindness, hatred, arrogance. And there are some things that are clearly good, right? If there's no God, who has made these things right or wrong? Now, Plato, Greek philosopher way back when, said these things simply exist. These things exist, and these moral values exist. That's hard. How does that just exist before the beginning of the universe? And if they did exist, why did they attach themselves to human beings? It really just doesn't make sense. This, though, makes sense because these are things that flow from God's nature, and we either follow these things or we follow those things on the other side. Now, I think a great example to think about with moral values is one of my favorite Christian movies, famous Christmas movies, is Christmas Carol. Remember Scrooge? And this is a great example of, he starts out on the left side of the page, and eventually, after the three visitations, moves to the right side of the page, right? This is where he's buying the giant turkey, and he is gone from greedy to sharing, from unkind to kind, to arrogance to loving. He is, and we all recognize that this side is superior. This side is superior. What makes this superior? I think this is best grounded in God. I like to watch some Marvel movies with my family, and here was one I thought, this might work pretty well in this class. So here's a scene from Captain America.
Look at that. He's making me cry. I am looking for qualities beyond the physical.
Do you know how long it took to set up this project? All the groveling I had to do in front of Senator What's-His-Name's committees?
Yes, I know. I am well aware of your efforts.
Then throw me a bone. Hodge passed every test we gave him. He's big, he's fast, he obeys orders, he's a soldier.
He's a bully.
You don't win wars with niceness, Doctor. You win wars with guts. Grenade! Move, move, move! Get away! Get back!
Dummy grenade. All clear. Back in formation.
Is this a test?
He's still skinny.
What I like about that is, again, it was showing certain values, courage versus cowardice, and saying, you know what, we're going to make somebody a superhuman. I want the right qualities around this so that they are a good hero and not a villain or a bully. And I think that was another nice picture to show that these two things are separate, and good is superior to evil or wrong. All right, let's go to the last thing around morality. I think is very, very powerful. And I use this sometimes with the teens. And I ask them, can you rank the moral value of these things? Are they all the same? Are they all of equal value? I mean, obviously not. I hope everybody would put human beings first. There's a few people who might put cats first, I don't know, but most of us recognize that human beings are of the highest moral value. And then you might have some of this stuff over here, and then, the tree and rocks will be towards the bottom. So the point is that moral value looks like this. When you look at creation, that there is a hierarchy or value. And that only makes sense from a theistic perspective, from a God perspective, right? So God is at the top, and whatever mirrors God the most closely is what is of more moral value. And that's why human beings have intrinsic value, and why we abolish slavery and get rid of other acts of favoritism. Now, if God does not exist and we are just a random collection of atoms, there's no way to justify that. We're really no better, no more moral worth than animals. You're just an evolved animal. But this is not the case. We all recognize that human beings are of more moral value. It's also what gives us rights, right? If you go back to the Declaration of Independence, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We have these, what we call human rights, because we are made in the image of God and we have tremendous value and worth. Last slide, I just want to go back to this slide here. Now, again, what I love about Christianity is that we have a solution to this, right? And it's that of the cross, is that God descended in the form of a human being, died for our sins so that we no longer have to feel guilty, but that our sins are covered. So praise God for his work there, his rescue mission.